The last passenger wasn't meant to arrive alive. Welcome to Mystery Magnifier. I am your host, Phantom. Tell me where you're watching from below. I truly love your comments. Let's start. It was on a damp evening in early autumn that I first heard the name of the St. Austell Special spoken with that faint, half-reverent thrill that attends things both fashionable and faintly disreputable. The St. Austell Special, as everyone in London society seemed to know, was the midnight express that ran down to the Cornish coast, its sleepers reserved not by mere mortals who booked at windows, but by those whose names glided through clubs, country houses, and drawing rooms like well-bred ghosts. I was dining quietly with Hercule Poirot in his flat in Whitehaven Mansions. If I say quietly, it is only relative. Poirot's idea of a peaceful dinner is a ceremony of small perfections. Knife aligned to plate at the correct angle. The bread warmed but not toasted. The coffee neither too bitter nor too weak. He had been in what I call a benevolent mood, which means that he corrected me only twice. Once on the misuse of a French phrase, and once on my habit of piling sardines too near the edge of toast. We were near the end of the meal when the doorbell rang. Poirot looked up sharply. "It is not yet 9, he observed. "No one rings at 9 unless he is in distress, or in love. Possibly someone wants to borrow your little grey cells for a fee," I remarked lightly. He gave me a glance in which amusement and rebuke were very neatly balanced. "My cells, mon ami, they are not the type to be borrowed. They are always at home." The bell rang again, more insistently. Poirot rose with a small sigh that implied the world's lack of consideration for digestion, and went to the door. A moment later he returned, ushering in a tall man with a sharp, weathered face and the broad shoulders of someone used to authority. He wore a dark overcoat still beaded with rain, and his hat was held in his hands as though he had snatched it up in haste. "Captain Arthur Wyndham," Poirot announced, "a friend of our good Inspector Japp. You will permit, yes, that I introduce my comrade, Captain Hastings." Wyndham bowed. "I'm sorry to intrude at this hour, Monsieur Poirot. Japp told me I might find you here. He said you were the man to see if my situation was unusual." Poirot's eyes narrowed very slightly. An infinitesimal movement that I have learned is his equivalent of leaning forward in excitement. "Unusual situations are my speciality. Sit you down, Captain. Take also a little of this cognac. It combats the wet weather and the agitation." Wyndham accepted both chair and cognac without protest. His hands trembled very faintly as he set the glass down. It was not the tremor of age. He could not have been more than 45, but of nerves strained close to breaking. "There has been a death," he said abruptly. Poirot did not start, as many men might. He merely nodded once. "Yes?" "On the St. Austell Special, the midnight train that left Paddington yesterday." Poirot lifted his eyebrows. "Ah, the famous train." "It arrived at St. Austell at 6 this morning," Wyndham went on. "All passengers accounted for, all but one, a Miss Eleanor Carlyle." At the name I gave a slight start. The Carlyles were well known to me. An old family of some distinction, not immensely rich but solid, with that air of country gravitas that makes wealthy parvenus feel suddenly ill-mannered. I'd met Miss Carlyle once, I remembered, at a garden party in Surrey. A pretty girl, more than pretty rather, in a composed, distant way, and if my recollection served, not easily flustered. "What do you mean not accounted for?" I asked. Wyndham looked at me with the faint impatience of a man forced to explain in polite circles what should have been obvious in a police station. "She boarded the train. We have the porter's list. We have the ticket. We have witnesses who saw her in the first-class lounge at Paddington. She was the last passenger to enter the sleeper corridor before departure. She never arrived." Poirot's fingers, which had been arranging his moustache into what I am convinced was an even more perfect symmetry, became still. "Never arrived," he repeated softly. "That is curious. But you speak of a death, Captain. If she is merely missing. She isn't merely missing. Wyndham leaned forward. At 5:30 this morning, the sleeping car attendant discovered blood in compartment B7. A great deal of blood, and behind the washstand panel, we found a body. I felt a coldness creep along my spine, a sensation not unfamiliar, but no less unpleasant for repetition. "A body of the lady?" Poirot asked. "No." Wyndham's voice was controlled, but I could hear the strain beneath it. "It was a man, middle-aged, throat cut, no papers, no luggage that could be identified as his, and he did not appear on the passenger manifest." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "So, a dead man who was not among the passengers, and a living woman who was. You see, Hastings, already the little wheels begin to turn." He looked back at Wyndham. "Tell me everything, but everything, Captain, not only what you think is important. Often the truth hides in what seems small." Wyndham drew a breath. "Very well. The St. Austell Special has 3 sleeping cars, A, B, and C. Car B is first-class sleepers reserved mostly for society people returning to their estates or seaside houses. Miss Carlyle occupied B7, or so the reservation says. B6 was taken by Lady Margaret Henshaw, B8 by Mr. Lionel Stokes, the industrialist, B5 by a Reverend Stephen Pritchard. Those are the immediate neighbors. The rest of the car held 6 more compartments." He fished in his pocket and produced a small notebook. "The train left Paddington at 12:05 a.m. The guard, Boissy, fellow named Rowley, says all was normal. At 12:10 he saw Miss Carlyle standing in the corridor, speaking briefly to someone he couldn't identify. A short man in a light coat, he says. He assumed it was the attendant. At 12:15 the sleeper attendant, Jameson, passed Miss Carlyle's compartment and believed the bed had been made down and the lights turned low. He did not see her directly, but heard movement, possibly her voice. Murmured Poirot. Believed, but did not see. Continue. After that, no one admits to having seen her. Lady Henshaw says she retired early and slept heavily. Mr. Stokes says he was awake until about 1, reading, and heard footsteps in the corridor twice. Once quick, once slow. Reverend Pritchard says he woke around 3 to use the washroom at the end of the carriage. He noticed nothing unusual except a faint smell. He describes it as metallic, perhaps blood in hindsight. At 5:30, Jameson went to wake Miss Carlyle because she had requested tea at 6. There was no answer. He used his key, entered, and found the compartment empty and the bedding untouched. No sign she had slept in it at all. But on the floor near the window was a woman's handkerchief embroidered with an EC and a spot of blood. Poirot nodded gently, as though congratulating the story for being interesting. And it was then he found the blood, yes? Behind the washstand? Yes. A dark stain along the skirting. He followed it, not much, but enough. The washstand panel had been forced open. Inside, cramped in the narrow space, was the dead man. Force? Poirot asked. How forced? By screwdriver? By hand? By a narrow blade, perhaps. There was a sliver of varnish lifted and a mark as if something thin had pried it. We haven't yet matched it to any tool. And the throat was cut with what kind of weapon? A very sharp one. A razor or small knife. Clean. Deep. Time of death. The doctor at St. Austell estimates between 1 and 3 a.m. Poirot was silent a moment, his forefinger tapping lightly against the side of his glass. The rhythm was maddeningly calm. To enter a compartment unlisted, to kill there, and to hide a body in such a place, it requires both audacity and knowledge of the carriage, he said at last. Wyndham nodded. Exactly. And there is another point. Car B was locked from the outside at 12:30 when the train passed Reading. It's the usual practice on these first-class sleepers. Reduces theft. The guard keeps the key. No one enters or leaves the car after that without the guard knowing. He swears nobody did. and the emergency doors between cars were not opened. We checked the seals. Therefore, Poirot said softly, the killer was inside car B all the time. That's the conclusion the railway police have drawn. But you are not satisfied, Captain. Wyndham's face hardened. No, because this isn't only a railway matter. Miss Carlyle is the niece of Sir Alistair Carlyle. He telephoned me personally at dawn. He is not a man who telephones lightly. He begged for my help. And I don't believe Eleanor Carlyle simply vanished into thin air. Nor do I believe she murdered a stranger and fled. Yet that is precisely what the St. Austell police are beginning to imply. Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. Ah, so already you have a pretty theory, yes? The lady disappears, blood in her compartment, a dead man within. The easy mind says she killed him and escaped. But you, Captain, you do not have the easy mind. I knew her as a child, Wyndham said quietly. She could not be. Poirot held up a hand. Sentiment is charming, but it is not proof. Still, we will not take the easy path until the grey cells have explored all else. He turned to me. Hastings, you look startled. You are thinking of the lady, no? I met her once, I admitted. She seemed composed. Not at all the type to slit a man's throat in a railway sleeper. Poirot smiled faintly. The type, Hastings? Ah, but people do not always murder in their type. Sometimes they murder in their secret. He rose briskly. Captain Wyndham, you will take us to St. Austell at once. We will see the compartment, we will see the list of passengers, and we will see what the police think they know. For now, I tell you this. In a closed carriage, with a missing lady and a dead stranger, the truth is not that there are too many possibilities. It is that there are too few, and one is being artfully hidden. Wyndham stared. You'll come? Tonight? Immediately, Poirot said, already retrieving his hat with the air of a man going to a pleasant appointment. The murderer has had a day to arrange his little stage. We must not allow him another night to rehearse. As we hurried to gather our coats, I felt that familiar mixture of excitement and dread. The night outside had deepened. The rain tapped at the window like impatient fingers. Somewhere, far away in Cornwall, a train stood silent on its tracks, holding within it a secret sealed by velvet curtains and polished mahogany. And Eleanor Carlyle, last passenger on the midnight train, had vanished as completely as if the darkness itself had swallowed her whole. The journey down to St. Austell was uncomfortable in the way such journeys always are when one's mind is hurrying faster than the train. Poirot, to my surprise, slept for a portion of it, sitting bolt upright, hat tilted at an exact angle, hands folded over his cane as if it were a matter of etiquette rather than fatigue. I, on the other hand, found sleep impossible. The image of that empty compartment, of blood where a girl I had once conversed with about roses and the weather was supposed to have sat, returned again and again like a newspaper photograph one cannot stop seeing. We arrived in the afternoon beneath a sky the color of pewter. St. Austell Station, though respectable enough, had none of Paddington's bustle. The platform held clusters of anxious railwaymen and a few grim-faced local policemen who looked as though London had sent them a puzzle they did not particularly want. Captain Wyndham led us briskly along the platform to where the St. Austell Special stood on a siding. It had been detached and held intact, cars still locked, blinds half drawn, like a specimen on a tray awaiting dissection. Superintendent Blunt of the county police met us at the step of Car B. He was a stocky man with a ruddy face and the wary politeness of one who has been told a famous detective is coming and is not quite sure whether to be grateful or resentful. Monsieur Poirot, sir, he began. Captain Wyndham has explained. We're obliged to you for attending, though I'm not certain. Poirot bowed with perfect courtesy. Superintendent, I do not come to take your case. I come only to look. The eyes are free. They ask no permission. Blunt blinked, then gave a short laugh he did not mean. "Well, if you can make sense of it faster than we can, I'll not complain. This way." He unlocked the sleeping car with a key that made a slight, almost mournful click in the damp air, and we stepped into the corridor. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not stale, but sharp and clean as only railway polish can be, and beneath it a faint acrid bite that might indeed, if one chose to imagine it, be the ghost of blood. Poirot moved as though he were entering a drawing room rather than a crime scene. He took in the corridor's length, the brass rails, the neat row of compartment doors, the little lamps above each one. Then he stopped and listened. "To hear the train," he murmured. "Even stopped, she speaks." I heard only the ticking of the lamps and a distant clank of shunting, but Poirot's senses are of another order. Blunt opened B7. We entered. The compartment was small, 2 polished bunks folded into the wall, a narrow seat, a washstand with a mirror above it. It looked as innocently domestic as a nursery on a ship. Yet the floorboards near the washstand had been scrubbed. Their sheen differed subtly from the rest. Under the window there was a faint discoloration where something had been hastily wiped. And on the washstand itself lay a sealed evidence envelope containing the blood-stained handkerchief Wyndham had mentioned. Poirot did not touch the envelope. He looked at it as if it were a portrait. "May I?" he asked Blunt. Blunt broke the seal and placed the handkerchief on a clean cloth. Poirot bent over it. The monogram EC was clearly stitched in pale blue. The blood was not a smear, but 2 small drops, as though from a finger. "Not much," I said. "No," Poirot agreed. "Not the blood of a slaughter, Hastings. The blood of a little accident, a scratch, or a warning." He studied the bed. It had indeed not been slept in. The pillows were plump, the coverlet smooth. Yet when he pressed his palm on the lower bunk, he nodded as if he had found what he expected. "Still warm?" I asked foolishly. He smiled. "Not of the body, mon ami. Of the air. The bunk has been folded down and back. Someone sat here. Perhaps to talk. Perhaps to wait." He turned to the washstand. The panel beneath it had been removed and replaced, leaving the tiniest misalignment visible only to an eye that wanted to see. Poirot knelt awkwardly. He detests any posture that risks disorder to his clothes, and peered along the wood. "Superintendent, how did your men open this?" he asked. "With a thin lever," Blunt said. "Just enough to pry it." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And before your men touched it, the panel had been shut again?" "Yes. Attendant found it shut. He noticed the stain. He tried the panel, found it loose, and called us." Poirot rose, brushed an imaginary speck from his knee, and looked once more about the compartment as if photographing it into his brain. "Let us see where the dead man lay," he said quietly. Blunt led us to the little end washroom where the body had been removed. I confess I was relieved. There is something peculiarly dreadful about a corpse in a place designed for sleep. It is like a child's cot turned into a coffin. The washroom now held only the memory of it, and the faintest rusty smear in the narrow cavity behind the panel. "Stranger," Poirot murmured. "Not on the list. No luggage. Yet he bled enough to leave traces here and there, and he was tucked away like a parcel one wishes not to be found." He walked back into the corridor and, to my astonishment, began to knock lightly on the adjacent compartment doors. "B6, if you please," he said. Blunt hesitated. "Lady Henshaw is at the hotel with a chaperone. She's shaken. If you insist, I can send for her. Later." Poirot tapped the door handle and pointed. "Observe, Hastings." The brass handle bore a tiny scratch on its underside, so slight I should never have noticed it. Poirot ran a fingertip along it, then held the finger up. There was a speck of dark residue. "Paint?" I ventured. "Varnish, perhaps. Or something else. We shall see. He moved on to B8. Again he studied the handle, the lock, the frame. There, too, I saw a faint mark as if a tool had slipped. Poirot straightened and looked down the corridor. "Someone has been very busy in the night," he said softly. "Very busy and very careful. But care leaves its own footprints." He turned suddenly to Superintendent Blunt with that polite firmness which people often mistake for mildness until they find themselves obeying him. "Superintendent, I would like to see the passenger manifest, the attendant Jameson, and the guard Rowley, and after that we will speak to the occupants of this car, one by one, in order." Blunt nodded, half relieved to be given clear instructions. "I'll have them brought to the station office. We've kept everyone in St. Austell under discreet watch. None have left town." "Discreetly," Poirot repeated, and I knew he approved. As we walked toward the office, the rain began again, drumming gently on the carriage roof. I found myself glancing back at the line of sleeping compartments, each door closed, each curtain drawn. Somewhere behind one of those doors, a person had moved in the darkness between 1 and 3 in the morning, quietly enough not to wake sleepers, boldly enough to kill, and cleverly enough to make a woman vanish without opening a locked carriage. Poirot, beside me, was humming under his breath. A small, contented sound, as though he were already arranging the pieces of a puzzle that I could barely see. And for the first time since Wyndham had rung our bell in London, I felt the case shift from nightmare to something worse. A game, played by a mind as orderly and ruthless as Poirot's own. The station office was one of those practical little rooms that smell of coal dust, damp wool, and ink. A fire burned industriously in the grate, though it did no more than take the edge off the chill that clung to us from the carriage. Superintendent Blunt offered chairs, papers, and an air of brisk competence. Poirot accepted the chair, ignored the air, and requested the papers. The passenger manifest lay on the desk, a neat list in Jameson's careful hand. Poirot read it as another man reads a love letter, slowly, with attention to each comma, as though it might blush and confess. "Car B," he said. "Let us see. B1 Sir Felix and Lady Dorothea Chislehurst, B2 Mrs. Maud Allenby, B3 Mr. Cedric Vale, B4 Miss Ruth Kettering, B5 Reverend Stephen Pritchard, B6 Lady Margaret Henshaw, B7 Miss Eleanor Carlyle, B8 Mr. Lionel Stokes, B9 Colonel Reginald Frobisher, B10 Dr. Anselm Drake." Good. 10 compartments occupied. He looked up. And yet one man dead who is not here. One woman missing who is. Very symmetrical, no? 1 plus, 1 minus. The accounts would like to balance themselves. Blunt cleared his throat. "We've checked tickets. Nobody was smuggled aboard. Nobody admits to bringing a guest. If he was there, he must have boarded at Paddington without a ticket, or hidden in another car and moved in after. Or he was never a passenger at all," Poirot said gently. "He might have been cargo, a man brought aboard for a purpose." Blunt stared at him, half annoyed. "They don't ship men like parcels, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Do they not? I've seen many men shipped, by fear, by greed, by love. The railway is only the method." There was a knock. Captain Wyndham entered with the guard, Rowley and the sleeping car attendant Jameson. Rowley was a sandy-haired fellow with the blunt honesty of the uniformed servant. Jameson thin, precise, his mustache trimmed to a point that almost rivaled Poirot's, though without the artistry. Poirot rose and bowed to them as if they were guests at a soirée. "You will forgive me for troubling you again. It is my habit to see with my own eyes what others have seen with theirs." He turned to Rowley first. "You locked car B from the outside at 12:30, yes?" "Yes, sir. Standard practice. I locked each end door. I kept the key." "Did any person ask you to open it between Reading and St. Austell?" "No, sir. Not one." "Did you open it yourself for any reason?" "No, sir." Poirot nodded as though he had expected exactly that. You are certain, because if you are not, it would be better to tell me now. There is no shame in an honest mistake. Rowley flushed. Certain, sir. I'm a careful man. Yes, said Poirot, and there was something in the way he said it that made Jameson glance sideways. Now tell me what you saw at Paddington. Not what you think matters. What you saw. Rowley shifted his feet. Well, sir, passengers came aboard between 11 and midnight. Mostly the usual lot. First class, all tidy. Miss Carlyle came at about 5 to 12. She had a porter with her bag. She walked down the corridor looking for B7. She was calm-like. I remember because she asked me the time. She said, "We are punctual tonight, are we not?" Polite she was. Then she went in. Did she have visitors? Poirot asked. Rowley frowned. Not in her compartment, but after we pulled out, I walked through to make sure all was well, and I saw her in the corridor. She was talking to a short gentleman. Light coat, like I told the captain. They were near the washroom end. I didn't hear what was said. She went back to her compartment after. Did the short gentleman go into her compartment? I can't say, sir. I went on. Would you recognize him again? Rowley hesitated. Maybe. It was dim. He had his hat low. Poirot thanked him with the air of a man to whom gratitude was a fine social art. Then he turned to Jameson. You passed B7 at 12:15 and believed the lady was inside. Yes, monsieur. I heard movement. A voice. Perhaps her voice. I did not look in. We are trained to respect privacy. Admirable, Poirot said. And later? Later, I made the rounds at 1. All doors were shut, all lights low. I heard nothing unusual. At 3, I was asleep in my berth at the end. At 5:30, I woke to prepare the morning service. I went to B7. I knocked. No answer. I entered. Empty. His Adam's apple bobbed. I thought perhaps she had gone to the washroom, but the bed untouched. Then I saw the handkerchief and the stain by the skirting. And you found blood behind the washstand panel? Yes. Jameson's voice tightened. I have worked sleepers 15 years. I have never seen such a thing. Poirot's gaze rested on him. When you say the panel was shut, do you mean firmly closed or only? Resting in place? Resting, monsieur. Not latched, as if someone had put it back quickly. Poirot nodded. One more thing. At any point did you see a man who should not have been in car B? Jameson looked surprised. No, monsieur. None at all. Not even briefly. For example, a man carrying a tray who is not of the staff? Jameson's eyes flickered. There was a gentleman who came through before 12:30. He was tall. He said he was going to speak to Colonel Frobisher in B9. I assumed he was a passenger from another car before the doors were locked. He looked like a gentleman. Did you see where he came from? From car A, I think. He stepped through the connecting door, but I cannot be sure. It was quick. Poirot's expression did not change, but I saw the small inward sharpening of his attention. Tall, he murmured. Not short. Interesting. And after 12:30, no one passed between cars? No, monsieur. The end doors were locked. The connecting door remained shut. Poirot thanked them both, dismissed them with courtesy, and waited while the door closed behind them. For a moment, he stood in silence. It was a different silence from the one at the carriage, less haunted, more alive, as if a clock had begun ticking softly behind the walls. 2 men, he said at last, to himself as much as to us. One short, one tall, both seen near the time when the car was still open. Yet only one unlisted man ends up dead. If he is unlisted, why is he seen like any other passenger? Unless what? I asked. His pauses always drag one's mind after them like a dog on a lead. He glanced at me affectionately, as if I were a child asking for a story too soon. Unless the unlisted man is not the one that was seen. Blunt spread his hands. We're going round in circles. We've got a missing lady and a dead stranger. All the neighbors say they heard or saw nothing. What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot? That someone swapped places in the corridor? That the guard and attendant are mistaken? Poirot sat, smoothing his cuffs. I suggest nothing yet. I observe, and I have observed, that your case depends on 3 statements. First, Miss Carlyle entered her compartment at Paddington. Second, no one entered or left car B after 12:30. Third, the dead man died between 1 and 3. If these 3 are true as you understand them, then yes, the lady must be guilty, or else the devils walked through walls. Wyndham's jaw tightened. And you don't believe in devils? Poirot smiled thinly. Not in the supernatural ones, no. In the human ones, sometimes. So we will test the 3 statements. We will see if any are a little crooked. He rose briskly. Now, Superintendent, we will speak to the passengers. Begin with the neighbors. The Reverend first, if you please. A man of God often notices what others ignore, even when he thinks he notices nothing at all. As Blunt went to send for Reverend Pritchard, I found myself looking at Poirot with renewed respect and unease. He had taken the chaos of a locked train and already reduced it to 3 pillars that could be pushed, tapped, and perhaps toppled. I still saw only darkness between them, shadows in a corridor, a girl vanished in night, but Poirot was listening for the hollow places where the truth would knock back. Reverend Stephen Pritchard arrived within 10 minutes, having evidently been within reach of the police. He was a spare man in his late 30s, with that nervous energy one sometimes sees in clergymen who have too much imagination for their own peace. His coat was shiny at the elbows, his collar a trifle frayed, and he carried his hat in both hands as though it might fly away if loosened. He greeted Superintendent Blunt with a stiff inclination, and Poirot with the kind of guarded curiosity men of the cloth often reserve for strangers who are not of their parish. Poirot, for his part, treated him with a deference that was not feigned but tactical. Poirot knows the value of making a man feel his dignity safe. "Reverend Pritchard," he began, "you were in B5 last night. You woke at 3 to go to the washroom. Tell me, if you please, with exactness what you remember. Do not attempt to be helpful, attempt to be truthful. The 2 are not always the same." The Reverend blinked, then nodded. "Yes, I'll do my best." "At what time did you retire?" "Shortly after midnight. I read a little, my breviary, and fell asleep perhaps just before 1. "You sleep well?" "Usually. Not always on trains, but last night I remember sleeping heavily until I woke with a dry throat." "That was about 3, yes?" "Perhaps a little before. I did not check my watch until after." "You rose?" "Yes. I put on my dressing gown and slippers. I opened my door quietly so as not to disturb anyone." "How did the corridor look?" The Reverend frowned, searching memory. "Dim. The night lamps were on. No one about. It was silent. No sound of footsteps, of doors opening, of voices?" "No." He hesitated. "But as I stepped out, I thought I heard— no, not heard exactly. Felt that someone had just passed. A slight movement in the air. I assumed it was my imagination." Poirot's eyes rested on him, steady as a pin. "You felt a movement? From which direction?" "From the washroom end, toward the middle of the car." "Ah." Poirot's tone was mild. "Could it have been the train swaying?" "Yes, of course. It could have been that." "Nevertheless, you noticed it. Continue." "I walked to the washroom at the end. I used it. When I came out, I remember pausing a moment because there was a smell." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me of this smell." "It is difficult to describe." The Reverend flustered unwillingly. "It was like iron, like coins held too, long in the hand. Metallic. I thought perhaps the washroom sink had been used and not properly rinsed, or that the disinfectant was particularly sharp." "Was it strong?" "Not strong, only noticeable because the corridor was so still." "And you saw no one?" "No." "You returned to your compartment?" "Yes. I remember glancing down the corridor as I went." There were no lights on behind any curtains. Everything seemed asleep. Poirot nodded. "You are a careful observer, Reverend. More careful than you think. One more question. When you stepped out, did any door seem ajar?" The Reverend shook his head. "No. All were closed." "Even B7? He looked startled. "I did not notice B7 specifically, but I should think so." Poirot thanked him warmly and dismissed him. As the Reverend left, I spoke up. "Does his felt a movement mean anything? It sounds terribly vague." Poirot's face softened into that indulgent patience he reserves for me. "Vague feelings are sometimes the shadow cast by a precise thing. He's not the kind of man to invent sensations for drama, Hastings. His mind is trained to examine his conscience. He will examine a corridor in the same way, without knowing it." Blunt grunted. "All right, he smelled something. We've already got blood in B7, it fits." "It fits too easily," Poirot replied. "When a thing fits too well, I begin to ask if it is the correct garment." Lady Margaret Henshaw came next. She swept into the office with the brisk dignity of a woman used to arriving in rooms where people stand. She was perhaps 50, handsome in a hawk-like way, her grey hair smoothed under a hat that seemed chosen for practicality rather than fashion. Her eyes darted once to Wyndham, who coloured oddly, then to Poirot, whom she surveyed as though he were a curious piece of furniture. "Monsieur Poirot, yes? I'm told you've been sent for." Her voice carried the faintest chill. "I must ask that this dreadful business be handled quickly. The people in town are talking already." Poirot bowed. "Madame, I desire nothing more than speed, but to be swift, one must first be exact. You were in B6 next to Miss Carlyle. You say you slept heavily. Let us be exact. When did you last see her?" "At Paddington." Lady Henshaw drew off her gloves with decisive little jerks. "We spoke in the lounge. She seemed in her usual health. We exchanged inconsequentialities. Then she went to her carriage. I went to mine. I slept. No word to her in the corridor. No, I dislike drafts. I do not linger in corridors." "Did you hear anything in the night?" "Nothing, not a sound." Her eyes hardened. "If there had been shouting or a struggle, I should certainly have heard it. I am not deaf." "Often there is no struggle," Poirot said gently. "Not all deaths are noisy." Her mouth tightened. "She is a quiet girl. If she met someone at night, I should be surprised. She has propriety." "Propriety can be a mask," Poirot murmured, almost to himself. Then aloud, "Did you lock your compartment door from the inside?" "Of course, any woman traveling alone does." "And you did not unlock it until morning?" "Not until Jameson knocked to tell me there was trouble. I rang for tea at 6. He told me there would be delay. I was annoyed, that is all." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, you mentioned you spoke with Miss Carlyle at Paddington. Did anyone else join you?" Her nostrils flared faintly as though the question displeased her. "A man did. Mr. Lionel Stokes. He was very attentive. I took no notice." "Attentive to you, or to Miss Carlyle?" There was a second's pause. "To her, I suppose. Men are often attentive to pretty girls." Poirot's gaze was steady. Did Miss Carlyle welcome this attentiveness? Lady Henshaw gave a small, dry laugh. "Eleanor welcomes nothing she hasn't already weighed and measured. She tolerated him. That is different." "And Mr. Stokes left you when?" "Just before midnight. He said good night in that booming way industrialists have, and went to his compartment." Poirot thanked her. She rose, nodded to Wyndham without expression, and left. The third neighbor, Mr. Lionel Stokes, arrived with a theatrical impatience that filled the doorway. He was a large, florid man with a gold watch chain and the air of one who considers time a commodity he usually buys. His voice came loud even in apology. "Look here, Superintendent. I was told this would be quick. I've got telegrams to answer. Minds don't run themselves." Poirot stepped forward, hand out, all courtesy. "Mr. Stokes, I will steal from you only what is necessary. Believe me, I respect the commerce of minutes." Stokes blinked at the earnestness, then allowed himself to be seated. "Well, ask away." "You were in B8. You say you read until 1 and heard footsteps twice." "Correct. First time around 12:30. Light steps, probably some lady going to the washroom. Second time nearer 1. Slower, heavier. I assumed it was the attendant." "Could you tell by sound if it was a man or a woman?" Stokes shrugged. "Not really. But the second set. Heavier, like boots." "Did you look out?" "No, I don't poke my head out in the middle of the night. I've had enough of trains to know you leave people be." "You saw Miss Carlyle earlier in the lounge?" "Yes." His tone softened half a shade. "Poor little thing. She looked tired. I offered to fetch her a coffee, but she refused. Very polite. Very distant. You know the type." Poirot nodded. "Did you know her well?" "Not well. Met her twice at Carlisle Manor. Her uncles asked me down about some investments on his estate. Timber rights, that sort of thing. She was there for dinner. Quiet as a mouse, but sharp. You could see that." "You were attentive to her, Lady Henshaw?" "Says." Stokes gave a short laugh that was all self-satisfaction. "Ah, women notice those things. I'm attentive to anyone I'm in company with." "Civilized, isn't it?" "She didn't care for it, though." Poirot's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Did she dislike you, Mr. Stokes?" Stokes flushed, half in irritation, half in vanity. "Not dislike. She's reserved. She doesn't give herself away. And yet you say you heard footsteps at 1. You thought it was the attendant, but you did not hear a knock at your door. No voice. No knock." He hesitated, and for the first time looked uncertain. "Now you mention it. No voice. Only the steps. They stopped somewhere along the corridor, maybe outside B7. Then went on." Poirot murmured, "Outside B7, softly, like a man repeating a musical phrase." Then he rose, indicating the interview at an end. As Stokes left, Blunt leaned back with a sigh. "All right. Nothing there. Everyone asleep, everyone proper. We're no further." Poirot did not answer at once. He was staring at the passenger list again, his finger moving down the names as if counting beads. "We are further," he said at last. "Not in facts, perhaps, but in shape. You see the pattern beginning, Hastings? Silence is a pattern, and already 3 people have given me, without knowing, 3 different silences." I frowned. "Different silences?" He smiled, a little sadly. "Lady Henshaw's silence is clipped and clean. She hears nothing because she wills herself to hear nothing. Mr. Stokes's silence is careless. He heard but did not bother to look. Reverend Pritchard's silence is haunted. He felt something and smelled something, and his conscience will not let it go. It is between these 3 silences that someone walked." He turned to Wyndham. "Captain, which passenger next has reason to lie to me even if he does not know it?" Wyndham stared. "How on earth?" Poirot's voice was light, but his eyes were alight. "Because in every closed circle there is a hinge. Find the hinge, and the door opens. I think our hinge is not next to B7 at all." He tapped 2 names on the list. B9 and B10, the colonel and the doctor, military habits and medical habits, both heavy with secrets, and both close to the washroom end. Bring them to me. Outside, the rain thickened, turning the station windows into blurred mirrors. Somewhere in that blurred world, the missing girl remained a blank space, and the dead man a nameless weight. Yet in the small, warm office, Poirot was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to tighten the net. Colonel Reginald Frobisher arrived first, propelled into the room by the kind of crisp impatience that seems to march before a military man even in civilian life. He was in his early 60s, lean as a riding crop, with a clipped grey mustache, and a cold blue stare that suggested he took in a man's shortcomings at a glance and filed them for later use. He carried a cane less for need than for discipline. It tapped twice on the floor as he came to a halt, like a punctuation mark. "Monsieur Poirot," he said curtly, "you have been sent for to clear this nonsense up. I'll tell you what I can, but I have an engagement at 7. Poirot bowed as if the colonel had offered him a bouquet. "Colonel, your engagements are safe with me. Sit, if you please. You were in B9 near the end of the car. You slept, perhaps?" "I slept until I was woken by that infernal commotion at dawn." "No waking in the night?" "None. I took a sleeping draught. The doctor prescribed it. I have a leg that rebels in damp weather. When I sleep, I sleep." Poirot's eyes narrowed pleasantly. "Ah, a draft from the doctor, from Dr. Drake in B10? "Just so." "You and the doctor are acquainted?" Frobisher gave a small, dismissive grunt. "We met in Cairo 3 years ago. Sound fellow. Travels much. I've asked him for advice when the leg's been troublesome." "Did he visit you last night?" The colonel's brows drew together. "Not that I recall. We spoke on the platform before boarding. He said he'd look in if I needed anything. I saw no one after I retired." "At what time did you retire?" "Just after 12. I changed, locked the door, took my draft, and was asleep before Reading, I should think." "You did not hear footsteps? A door? Anything at all?" "No." Poirot nodded once, as though that answer had been inevitable. "Colonel, you're a man of habit. You locked your door. Are you certain you turned the lock fully?" The colonel bristled. "Sir, I've locked doors longer than you've been alive." Poirot's face was full of apology and admiration. "Then you will understand that I ask only because habits have their own little blind spots. Sometimes a man is so sure of a thing that he performs it without noticing whether he has performed it." Frobisher's cane tapped again, sharper now. "I locked it. Fully. If you're suggesting someone came into my compartment, you're wasting your time." Poirot spread his hands. "I suggest nothing. I ask. One more question, if you please. In the lounge at Paddington, did you see Miss Carlyle?" "I saw her sitting with Lady Henshaw and that loud industrial chap. She nodded to me, that is all." "And did you see a man who was not among your circle? A stranger who seemed out of place?" Frobisher hesitated. "I saw the first crack in military certainty. There was a fellow, yes, a man in a railway porter's coat, but not a porter. Too fine in the hands. He stood near the bookstall and watched the sleepers. I noticed because he was nervous. Kept wiping his brow. I assumed he was waiting for someone." Poirot's head tilted. "A porter's coat? Interesting. Short or tall?" "Neither. Medium height? Thin." "Did you see where he went?" "No. I lost sight of him when we boarded." Poirot thanked. "Him." The colonel rose as if he had been dismissed from parade, bowed stiffly to Wyndham and Blunt, and left without another word. I leaned toward Poirot. A man in a porter's coat. Could that be our unlisted man? Poirot did not answer directly. It is a man seen by a colonel who prides himself on noticing what others do not. Therefore, I keep it in my pocket. Dr. Anselm Drake was very different. He entered without hurry, a tall, sandy-haired man in his 50s with a gentle face that somehow managed to look both tired and amused. His eyes were intelligent and watchful, but with the calm surface of someone who has seen darker things than a railway murder and does not feel the need to dramatize them. He shook hands with Poirot dispassionately. "I'm sorry we meet under such circumstances," he said. "I've been told there is a missing young woman. I hope you will find her alive." "That is also my hope, Doctor. Sit. You are in B10 next to the Colonel. You prescribed him a sleeping draught?" "Yes. He asked me on the platform. His leg was giving him trouble." "What did you give him?" "Chloral hydrate, a mild dose. Enough to allow sleep. He is a robust man." Poirot's gaze was mild but not casual. Did you deliver it to him in his compartment? No, I gave it to him in the lounge. I had my medical case with me. So you did not visit his compartment during the night? No. Did you sleep? Not particularly well. I read for a while. I was drafting some notes. I may have dozed after one. You say may have. Therefore, you are not certain. Drake smiled faintly. On trains, time slips oddly. One wakes and thinks it has been an hour. It has been 3. You did not leave your compartment? I left once. Around 2, perhaps. I went to the washroom. Poirot's eyes sharpened. You went at 2. Tell me exactly. I woke with a headache. The air in sleepers is close. I stepped out quietly, went to the washroom at the end, splashed my face, and returned. Did you see anyone? No. Did you smell anything unusual? There was the smallest pause. I noticed a faint antiseptic smell, but the washroom is always cleaned strongly before a run. Poirot nodded, but I saw his hand tighten ever so slightly on his cane. The corridor. Was it empty? Yes. Any door ajar? I don't think so. Poirot leaned forward, voice soft as velvet. Doctor, I'm not asking you to think. I'm asking you to remember. When you returned, did you look down the corridor? Drake's brows lifted, then drew together in concentration. Yes, I did. There was a sliver of light under one door. B7, I believe. I remember because it surprised me. Most people sleep by then. A sliver of light, Poirot repeated. Under B7. Yes. You did not hear voices? No. And yet you saw light. Therefore, someone was awake in B7 at 2 o'clock. That is a precise observation, Doctor. I thank you. Drake looked faintly troubled now. If you mean Miss Carlyle, I do not mean anything yet. Poirot rose, signifying the interview done. Only that your memory has given us weight. And weight, Doctor, is what makes a theory stop floating in the air. When Drake had gone, Superintendent Blunt rubbed his chin. Light under B7 at 2, footsteps at 1, metallic smell at 3, a stranger in a porter's coat at Paddington. Fine, but what does it do? We still have no way for a body to get into B7 and no way for Miss Carlyle to get out without the guard opening the car. It does much, Poirot said quietly. He had taken the list again and now, with a pencil, drew small marks beside names. You see, Superintendent, your case was built on a locked carriage, but a locked carriage is only a locked carriage if everyone agrees where the locks are. A lock may be on a door. It may also be on the mind. I felt a prickle of impatience. Poirot, what are you getting at? He looked at me, almost tenderly. At this, Dr. Drake saw light under B7 at 2. Therefore, someone was inside B7 at 2. Reverend Pritchard smelled blood at 3. Therefore, blood was newly present by 3. The dead man died between 1 and 3. Therefore, the killing likely happened during that interval. So far, so good. But the bed in B7 was not slept in. Therefore, the person awake at 2 was not preparing for sleep. He or she was there for another purpose. Miss Carlyle could have been waiting for someone, I said. Yes. Poirot's voice was light. Or someone was waiting for Miss Carlyle. He tapped the passenger list. Tell me, Hastings, who is in B3? Mr. Cedric Vale. And B4? Miss Ruth Kettering. And B2, Mrs. Allenby. B1, the Chislehursts. I looked up, puzzled. Why? Poirot smiled a little wickedly. Because while all of you look only at B6, B7, and B8, the murderer will be pleased. The murderer likes a small stage, but often the real stage is larger, and the actor, who seems far away, is the one who steps into the light. He turned to Blunt. We have spoken to the neighbors and to the end. Now we speak to the middle, especially to those who have not yet been troubled by your questions. Bring me Mr. Cedric Vale next. And after? Blunt asked. Poirot's gaze flicked toward the rain-blurred window, toward the silent carriage on the siding. After, perhaps, we will learn why a man in a porter's coat watches sleepers at midnight, and why a girl who welcomes nothing she has not measured might have left her handkerchief on a floor she never slept upon. His voice was calm, but beneath it I felt that tightening again, the net drawing, slowly, almost invisibly, around someone who did not yet know he was caught. Mr. Cedric Vale arrived with an air of faint apology, as if he had somehow caused the rain by merely existing. He was a dark young man, 30 or thereabouts, neatly dressed, carefully groomed, with a thin, sensitive face and eyes that moved too quickly from one person to another. There was something theatrical in his courtesy, but not in the vulgar sense. Rather, the manner of a man who has practiced self-control until it becomes a role. He bowed to Superintendent Blunt with restraint, then to Poirot with rather more attention. Monsieur Poirot, I understand you wish to ask me about last night. I'm afraid I can offer very little. Poirot indicated a chair. In my experience, Mr. Vale, those who offer very little often offer precisely what is needed. Sit, I beg you. Vale sat, folding his hands. His fingers were long and nervous. They twisted once in his lap and then forced themselves still. You were in B3, Poirot began. Tell me first, how well did you know Miss Carlyle? Vale's eyelids flickered, only slightly. We've met at Carlyle Manor. She is a friend of my cousin. Nothing more. A friend of your cousin, Poirot repeated. Which cousin is that? Miss Ruth Kettering. I, who had been following the passenger list only in a general fog of names, felt a small jolt. Poirot did not look at me, but I sensed he had expected my reaction. So you are related to Miss Kettering in B4? Poirot said mildly. And you traveled together last night? Yes. We happened to be going to St. Austell at the same time. Happened, Poirot murmured. That is a flexible word. Was St. Austell your destination as well, Mr. Vale? It is convenient for my business, Vale said, his voice composed but faintly strained. I am meeting a solicitor there tomorrow. A solicitor for what affair? Vale hesitated. For family matters. Ah. Poirot nodded as though family matters explained everything and nothing. Now, on the train, did you see Miss Carlyle after boarding? No, I retired early. At what time? Shortly after midnight. I read a little, then slept. Soundly? Reasonably. You did not leave your compartment? No. Did you hear any sound in the corridor? Footsteps? A door opening? A cry? No, I'm sorry. Poirot said gently, It is not you who should be sorry, Mr. Vale, unless you are hiding something from me. Are you hiding something? Vale's head lifted sharply, offended and frightened together. No, certainly not. Poirot spread his hands. Then we proceed. You said Miss Kettering was your cousin. You were traveling with her, yet you were not in the same compartment. Ruth prefers privacy, he said with a faint grimace. She insisted. She's not a child. Poirot watched him. And did you speak with her in the lounge? Yes. We had coffee. Then Lady Henshaw called her over. I remained with my book. Did Miss Carlyle join them? Yes, I believe so. Did you notice anything unusual in Miss Carlyle's manner? Vale frowned. Unusual? No. She seemed as she always does. Quiet, rather preoccupied. If anything, she was less brisk than usual. Less brisk, Poirot repeated softly. Explain. I don't know how to put it. She looked tired, worried, as though expecting something she did not wish to happen. Poirot's eyes warmed with interest. Did she say so? No. Did anyone speak to her besides Lady Henshaw and Mr. Stokes? Away went Vale's gaze, quick as a bird. Not that I recall. Poirot leaned back. You do not recall, or you did not notice? Vale swallowed. There were people passing. The platform was busy. You noticed a man in a porter's coat, perhaps? Vale stared. A porter's coat? No. Why would I? Poirot let it go with a shrug that was more like a silk curtain drifting shut. Very well. One last thing. At any time in the night did you hear a whistle, a knock at the connecting door, anything that seemed not part of the train? No. Poirot stood. Merci, Mr. Vale. You have been helpful, even in your little way. After he had gone, I said, he seems nervous, but he knows Miss Kettering and Carlyle. That's something. Poirot nodded. Nervousness is contagious on trains. But yes, he is a thread between two women. We will pull it carefully. Miss Ruth Kettering entered as if she were stepping onto a stage she owned. She was about 28, striking rather than pretty, dark hair in a sleek wave, green eyes that looked bored even when they were alive, lips that turned down by habit. She wore a traveling suit of excellent cut and carried a cigarette case as though it were a weapon. If Eleanor Carlyle was composed distance, Ruth Kettering was composed defiance. Well, she said, sitting before anyone offered, I hope this won't take too long. My aunt is in hysterics at the hotel, and I intend to get her on the next train back to London. Poirot bowed. I shall be as brief as justice permits, mademoiselle. You were in B4. You slept? Eventually. I read until past 1. I rarely sleep on trains. The noise irritates me. Yet you heard no noise of a struggle. She laughed sharply. If there had been a struggle, I should have heard it. Unless everyone involved tiptoed and whispered. Poirot inclined his head. That is a fair point. You read until past 1. Did you hear footsteps in the corridor? Yes, several times. Describe them. Once, about 12:30. Light footsteps. Female, I'd say. Someone going to the washroom. Once later, around 1, heavier steps. Slow. They paused outside my door. Outside B4? Yes. I called out. Who is it? No answer. Then they went on. I assumed an attendant checking doors. Poirot's voice was soft. Did you open your door? No, I'm not an idiot. Very wise. Poirot nodded, then asked casually, when you called out, did your voice wake anyone farther down the corridor? For example, did you hear another door move or a reply? No. Did you see Miss Carlyle in the corridor after midnight? Ruth's eyes sharpened at the name, interest and something else. I saw her in the lounge before we left. She didn't look well. Not well in what way? Anxious. Ruth snapped the cigarette case open and shut. She has that stiff sort of calm, like a person holding something down. I asked if she was all right. She said she was fine. She was lying. Poirot watched the cigarette case. Did you know why she was anxious? No, I'm not her keeper. And yet you asked. Ruth's mouth twisted. Habit. We've known each other since school. She's never been sentimental, but I suppose I noticed. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Did she mention any plan for the journey? Meeting anyone? Changing cars? Ruth shook her head. Nothing. Only that she had to get to St. Austell by morning. She said it oddly, as if it mattered. How did it matter? Again, that flicker of impatience. How should I know? She wouldn't say. Eleanor keeps everything locked up. Poirot smiled. Yes, locks again. Ruth lifted her chin. If you're insinuating she killed anyone, you can stop. Eleanor isn't built that way. She's stubborn, moral to the bone. If she wanted a man dead, she'd probably write him a letter first and give him a week to repent. Blunt coughed, half amused, half scandalized. Poirot said placidly, I insinuate nothing. I listen. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you see a short man in a light coat with Miss Carlyle after departure? Ruth stared. No, why would I? I was in my berth by then. And did you see a tall man pass through the car before the doors were locked? She hesitated. Tall man? There was a fellow, yes, about midnight. He walked down the corridor from car A toward the washroom end. I remember because his coat brushed my door as he passed and I thought him rude. Did you recognize him? No, I suppose he was visiting someone at the end. Did he come back? I didn't see him come back, but I was reading. I might not have noticed. Poirot thanked her with charming gravity and let her go. She swept out, leaving behind a faint smell of cigarette smoke and impatience. For a moment, no one spoke. Poirot stood very still, his eyes half closed, like a cat that has heard the rustle that proves the mouse is in the wall. "Now we have it," he said at last. "Have what?" Blunt demanded. Poirot opened his eyes. "The tall man. You see, he is now seen by Jameson and by Miss Kettering. 2 witnesses. He goes toward the washroom end before 12:30. He does not return, at least not in any way that leaves a memory. That is already a story." Wyndham frowned. "But what story? If he went to see the Colonel—" "He did not visit the Colonel," Poirot said quietly. "Frobisher would remember, and Frobisher's draft, if taken, makes him sleep. Therefore the tall man went to someone else, or to something else. Perhaps to the end washroom, perhaps to the hidden panel." I felt a sudden cold clarity. "You think the tall man might be the unlisted man?" Poirot gave me a look of gentle correction. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the unlisted man was already hidden, and the tall man went to free him. We do not yet know which is which, but we know this. While we were all looking for a short man in a light coat, a tall man walked straight into the picture, and nobody thought to frame him." Blunt swore softly. "We've not identified a tall man among the passengers." "Exactly." Poirot's voice was soft, almost affectionate. "And now, Superintendent, I will ask for something very practical. Bring me the luggage records for Car B, every trunk, every bag, every case that was loaded at Paddington. Because if a man can enter a locked carriage without a ticket, perhaps he entered in a way more compact than you imagine." The notion was grotesque enough to make my stomach turn. Yet Poirot said it with perfect calm, as though discussing the shipping of hats. Outside, the rain continued its steady drumming, but inside my head another sound had begun, a slow, ominous tapping, like a cane on a platform. The tall man had walked down that corridor in the last minutes before the locks were turned. He had brushed Ruth Kettering's door. He had passed Jameson with the easy authority of a passenger, and then he had vanished into the hours where blood was spilled and a girl disappeared. If he was not on the list, then already one of Poirot's pillars had begun to crack. The hotel at St. Austell, a sober Georgian place with an over-polished staircase and a drawing room that smelled faintly of wet tweed, had been put at Superintendent Blunt's disposal for what he called, with a little provincial unease, Mr. Poirot's conference. The suspects, having spent a long and miserable day under discreet observation, were asked to assemble there at 8 o'clock that evening. I've been present at more of these finales than I can count, yet the moment before Poirot speaks always sets my nerves on edge. The room is arranged as though for a concert. The people seated are the instruments, and Poirot, with his polished composure, is about to strike the first note. Only here the music is human fear. They came in ones and twos, Sir Felix and Lady Dorothea Chislehurst, fluttering like indignant hens, Mrs. Allenby pale and tight-lipped, Mr. Vale thin and watchful, Miss Kettering with an air that dared anyone to try her patience, Reverend Pritchard looking as if he prayed the furniture might swallow him, Lady Henshaw upright as a spear, Mr. Stokes booming and irritated, Colonel Frobisher frostily attentive, and Dr. Drake last of all, entering with the same mild professional calm he had worn all day. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, immaculate, hands folded. Captain Wyndham and Superintendent Blunt remained nearer the door. I noticed Poirot had placed a small table beside him with a tray upon it. On the tray lay 3 objects: the sealed envelope containing Eleanor Carlyle's handkerchief, a slim, narrow-bladed instrument that looked like a surgeon's probe, and a railway luggage tag attached to a strip of leather. When all were seated, Poirot bowed slightly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "I thank you for your patience. I know this day has been uncomfortable, but I must ask you now for a little more. We are here not to make you suffer, but to make the truth speak. And the truth, like a shy lady, requires a proper introduction. There was a rustle of unease. Someone, Mrs. Allenby, I think, made a small choking sound and stopped. Poirot continued gently. A man is dead. His throat was cut in the sleeper B7. His body was hidden behind the washstand panel. He was not on the passenger list. A woman is missing, Miss Eleanor Carlyle, who was on the passenger list. You have all, in one way or another, been near those facts. Therefore, you are all, in one way or another, part of the explanation. He picked up the luggage tag by its leather strip. Let us begin with what seems dull. Luggage. The railway keeps records, not for romance, but for responsibility. Yesterday at Paddington, 10 pieces of first-class luggage were loaded for car B, one for each compartment. There was also an 11th. A ripple ran round the room. Dr. Drake's expression did not change by so much as a hair. This 11th, Poirot said, was a medical trunk, very large, very heavy. It bore the name Dr. Anselm Drake. It was checked personally, and it was carried aboard, not by a porter, but by a man wearing a porter's coat who was not of the railway staff. Colonel Frobisher shifted, eyes narrowing. Poirot nodded to him. Yes, Colonel, the nervous man you saw by the bookstore. We no longer wonder why you noticed him. Mr. Stokes barked. Are you implying the doctor smuggled someone in a trunk? Nonsense! Poirot turned to him pleasantly. Nonsense, Mr. Stokes, is only sense we have not yet arranged properly. I do not ask you to believe. I ask you to listen. He set the tag down and lifted the narrow-bladed instrument. Superintendent Blunt's men found the washstand panel in B7 had been pried open with a thin blade. When I examined the door handles near B7, I found fine scratches with dark residue. This instrument matches those scratches exactly. It comes from a medical case. He looked around. Only one person aboard car B carries such instruments as a matter of course. The doctor. Dr. Drake's mild eyes met his without alarm. Many gentlemen carry penknives, Monsieur Poirot. Indeed, but penknives are thick. This is thin, and there is more. Poirot's voice remained courteous, but I felt the room tighten around it. Dr. Drake told us he gave Colonel Frobisher a sleeping draught in the lounge. The colonel believed it. Yet the draught bottle found in B9 was not his. The label had been replaced. The dose was double what the doctor admitted prescribing. Colonel Frobisher slept like the dead because he was made to sleep like the dead. Lady Henshaw drew a sharp breath. You can't know that. I know because the colonel's bottle bears the faint smear of disinfectant that Dr. Drake uses on his hands. I know because the colonel, so exact a man, would have noticed if a stranger's bottle had been pressed on him in the lounge. And I know because someone needed the colonel to sleep through footsteps that otherwise might have awakened a soldier's ear. Dr. Drake smiled faintly. You are building a pretty edifice, Monsieur Poirot. But where is your foundation? You still have no proof I entered B7. Poirot inclined his head. We come to that. At 12:10, Miss Carlyle was seen in the corridor speaking to a short man in a light coat. She was anxious in the lounge. She said she must reach St. Austell by morning. She was waiting for someone. That someone was not a passenger. It was the man in the porter's coat who had boarded without a ticket before departure and slipped into car B while it was still open. He was the dead man. Reverend Pritchard murmured, Who was he? Poirot's eyes softened. His name is Felix Morton, a clerk by trade, a blackmailer by vocation. He had been sending Miss Carlyle letters for weeks, threatening to expose a scandal connected to her late father, nothing criminal, but enough to ruin an old family's name. Miss Carlyle, in her pride and her pity, agreed to meet him quietly on the train and pay him to be silent. That is why she was on the St. Austell special at midnight. That is why she looked worried. And that is why she stood in the corridor with him after departure. Miss Kettering sprang upright. Eleanor never told me. No, Poirot said gently. She would not. She carries burdens alone. But listen still. He turned back to Dr. Drake. Morton was not only blackmailing Miss Carlyle, he was also blackmailing you, Doctor. The calm in Drake's face cracked, just a sliver, like varnish lifting under a blade. Poirot went on very softly. In Cairo, you were not Dr. Anselm Drake. You were Dr. Hans Dreyer, struck off for an illegal operation performed for money. The evidence of that disgrace, letters, a witness statement, your old registration, was in Morton's possession. He meant to sell it to the highest bidder. Last night, when he came into B7, you followed him. You had already seen him on the platform, already feared him. You walked down the corridor before 12:30. 2 people noticed you. You told the attendant you were going to see the colonel because it gave you a harmless destination. But you did not go to the colonel. You went to the girl and her blackmailer. Dr. Drake said quietly, "This is fantasy." Poirot's voice was velvet over steel. You entered B7 while Miss Carlyle was there. There was a quarrel. Morton was greedy. You were desperate. You cut his throat with a razor from your case. Cleanly, as a surgeon would. Miss Carlyle screamed once, perhaps, and in the struggle she scratched her finger. 2 drops of blood on her handkerchief. Then you did what a medical mind does when it thinks of bodies not as people, but as problems. A faint sound escaped Mrs. Allenby. Someone crossed themselves. You hid Morton behind the panel, Poirot said. You wiped the floor. You left the handkerchief to suggest Miss Carlyle's guilt. Then you dealt with the witness. You chloroformed her. She never slept in her bed because she never meant to. She was dragged, unconscious, from her compartment into the corridor at the quietest hour, when your drug ensured no soldier's ear would wake and no neighbor's knock would be answered. And you put her into the one place no one thinks to look at on a first-class carriage, your enormous medical trunk. Blunt jerked forward. We examined that trunk earlier. Poirot lifted a hand. Yes. After I asked for the luggage records, your men found it heavier than it ought to be, with fresh air holes drilled from the inside. You opened it. You found Miss Carlyle alive but sedated, wrapped in a traveling rug. At that moment, Superintendent, you sent officers to Dr. Drake's hired cottage outside town, where his assistant, the man in the porter's coat, was waiting with a motor car. Miss Carlyle was to be taken there and disposed of before dawn. There was a gasp, then a babble of voices. Miss Kettering had gone white. Mr. Vale rose half out of his chair, staring. Lady Henshaw murmured, "Thank God," as if in church. Even Stokes, for once, found no words. Dr. Drake did not move. Only his eyes had changed. The mildness had gone out of them like a candle snuffed. "You cannot prove I meant to kill her," he said. Poirot looked almost sad. "Perhaps not in the way you mean, but you meant to remove her from the world in which she could speak. That is enough for me." He stepped aside slightly. "Superintendent." Blunt nodded. 2 officers at the door moved forward. At the same instant, Drake lunged, not at Poirot, but toward the window, swift as a man who has already rehearsed escape. Wyndham was quicker. He caught Drake's arm, twisted, and the doctor's calm dissolved into a sharp cry. When they had taken him out, the room sagged as if a weight had been lifted from the air. I heard Miss Kettering give a small, choking sob she would later deny. Reverend Pritchard whispered a prayer under his breath. The colonel stared into the fire, expression unreadable. Poirot turned to the rest of us, smoothing his cuffs as though this were only the end of dinner. "Miss Carlyle will recover," he said quietly. "A bruised head, shock, but she lives. And that, mes amis, is why we do not accept the easy theory when it offends the little gray cells. The easy theory would have killed her twice, once in the mind, once in the heart." Lady Henshaw rose, trembling slightly despite herself. Why did he not simply flee after the murder? Why take such risk? Poirot's mouth curved faintly. Because fear makes a man ambitious. He did not only wish to escape Morton's blackmail, he wished to remove the one witness and then return to his practice with his name spotless. He believed order could be manufactured like a prescription, But the human soul, madame, resists such medicine. Later, when the others had gone, shaken, murmuring, clinging to their own explanations, Poirot and I stood alone by the embers. Rain still tapped at the windows, but the sound no longer felt like threat. It felt only like weather. "You saw it early," I said. "The tall man, the trunk, the locks." Poirot nodded. One must always ask, what is the murderer counting on us not to notice? In this case, he counted on class. Who looks inside a doctor's trunk in first class? Who imagines a young lady folded into luggage? It was not cleverness of mechanism, it was cleverness of prejudice. "And Eleanor?" I asked softly. "Why didn't she tell anyone about the blackmailer?" Poirot's eyes grew thoughtful. "Because pride is also a lock, Hastings. She would rather face danger alone than let her family name be dragged through the light. It is a beautiful thing, pride, and a foolish one. We must be kind to it." A moment later, Wyndham came back in, tired but relieved. "They've found the assistant," he said. "He tried to run. He didn't get far. Miss Carlyle is awake. She asked for you, Poirot." Poirot sighed a little wearily now that the music had ended. "Then I will go to her. I will tell her she's safe and that silence bought with fear is never silence at all." He picked up his hat, set it at its exact angle, and looked at me with that small, wry tenderness that makes his seriousness bearable. "Come, Hastings. We have delivered justice, but we must also deliver mercy. That is the harder parcel, and the one the train never records.